So they've told me to expect about 100,000 words.
My.
So about 300 pages is what you're looking
I
at.
think 5 to 7
Yeah.
pages is a little bit stressful.
Yeah.
I've got almost 6,000, or maybe I have close to 7,000 now. I'm not sure that I've written. And by the end of this year, I should have 20 to 25,000. If I want to stay on target, I should have 20 to 25,000 words written.
And what is it about?
So I am, interestingly enough, it ties into what we're talking about in this class. I am looking at the role relationships play amongst legislators in the pursuit of their individual goals, right, as a legislator. So, and trying to determine, okay, if I'm a legislator and I've got goals about passing specific legislation, do I develop different types of relationships than a legislator whose ultimate goal is to run for higher office somewhere, right? And does that person develop different relationships than the person who's wanting to move up legislative leadership, like become majority leader or Speaker of the House, something like that? So that's what I'm looking at.
Personal aspirations versus aspirations to serve the people of the legislators.
Yeah, right. So every legislators are just like that. They all have kind of goals that they're trying to pursue, even as they're trying to fulfill their job as. And that's one of the things that I'm having to figure out too, is how do they define their role as a legislator? What does that mean to them? And then how do these relationships help them fulfill that role as well as meet their personal goals? So, and I'm early on. I'm kind of doing you've had to do a literature review for, right?
Intro to political
Yeah.
science, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So just think multiple times larger, but that's the first couple of years. That's all I'm doing is writing my literature review.
Oh, my.
Yeah. So that's going to be a
That's
healthy chunk of that 100,000 words will be the literature review.
That's my direct study is the intro to poli sci. And
Yes.
You're giving me the book today for the.
No. But you are going to get it this week.
Okay.
But we'll talk about that after class. But I've got a huge sack in my car of books.
Oh, nice.
And I'm arguing with myself whether I'm going to loan these books to you or whether I'm going to scan them and have you just read the sections that I want you to read out of them. I've gotten a little gun shy about loaning books because oftentimes I haven't got them back, which makes me very angry.
Yeah.
Not too angry, but
You
it gets
still
me a
don't
little.
have the intro to political science book anymore?
So I'm using a different textbook than we use there, but then for his project, it's not just moving through the book. He's got supplemental readings he's going to do. He's going to be doing some interviews of some folks, a lot of interviews, primarily of political scientists, probably around the state, and maybe some practitioners like some public polling folks or some party chairs, stuff like that too. But so yeah, you're going to be learning a lot, and it's going to feel like work in the process. But I think you'll learn a lot more. Let's see, we went last spring, right? You took Intro to Political Science, right?
Yeah, online.
Yeah. I actually think, I didn't say this out loud, you'll probably learn a little bit more about the discipline that they did in the class. I like the textbook that I switched to really well, and there's been some really good work done over the last decade or so related to some of the topics within the text that I think you need to be familiar with. So, yeah. And if you want to see his reading list, I'm sure he'll share it with you.
And you're gonna know everyone in the state with all your.
I know, right?
Between that and state and local.
Yeah, for real.
Yes, and I am always okay with crossover between classes. So if you're doing something related to this class, and you're like, oh, that would be a good person I have no problem with that. Okay. Yeah. I have the way I figure plan out the interviews. I'll probably have some suggestions for people to interview, especially early on, and probably even craft some specific questions that I think but towards the middle of the semester, especially on the question side, I'm more going to expect you to develop your own questions to ask. You just want them to be similar to the style that I craft for the early ones. Okay. All right, let's see. I guess we should get started here. Let's come over here. Attendance. I wonder where everybody is because I'm not seeing. Oh, let's go here first.
Like 10, 15 people.
Amelia. There, now I need to put Landry in here. And he is like right there. Okay. And then I've got some folks on Zoom. Let me go see who I've got. I've got Andrew and Aiden. I know that. Let's see, Andrew. There's Aiden and Andrew. All right, you guys on Zoom, you can hear me pretty well? Yes?
Yes, sir.
I can
All
hear
right.
you.
Very good. Hey, don't as I'm moving through some of this stuff, and I'm gonna share my screen so you can see the slides as we're moving through here. But if you have a question or something, don't hesitate to interrupt me and get my attention. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So this week we're looking at the Constitution of the state of Oklahoma. Right. So I guess first thing to know is every state has its own constitution. Right. We don't just have the U.S. Constitution, but we have state constitutions as well. The state constitutions do have to be in compliance, if you will, with the U.S. Constitution. But they can, the states still retain a significant amount of powers over a lot of policy areas. And so they're not identical, if you will. And, you look at Oklahoma's, is Oklahoma's a long or a short?
It's the third longest.
It's the third, very good, right? It is the third longest constitution.
Behind Alabama and Texas.
Alabama, and I have to look and see,
Ridiculous.
they're like 300,000
They
words
should
or
be,
something.
yeah.
You're like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? And I can't remember if it's longer or shorter than Texas. I think it is shorter.
Texas is 88,000, we're 81.
Well, 81. Okay, so there you go. So yeah, so there you have it. And all right, so let's see here. Let's see if I can get this thing to work. All right, so let's start with the construction of, so one of the things that the U.S. Constitution says is that the federal government will ensure that each state has a Republican form of government, right? Now, as I explained to all my beginning American government classes, doesn't mean all the officials have to be Republicans, right? We're talking about the structure of the system. So it's got to have three branches, representation, free and fair elections, those kinds of things, right? And one of the differences within governmental systems in the United States is the structure of the executive branch. So you can have an executive branch that is either weak or divided, or one that is strong or united, right? Oklahoma has a divided executive, meaning the governor does not have direct authority over most of the major officials in the executive branch, okay? Those officials get elected directly by the people. They're not appointed by the governor. So if you take what might be similar positions at the state level to the national level, say at the US, you have the Secretary of Labor, okay? That person is appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. That's how they get that job. In Oklahoma, we have a labor commissioner, but they are not appointed by the governor. They're elected by the people for that position, right? And we have about eight to nine different positions like that in our executive branch. In addition to the governor, we have the lieutenant governor, we have the attorney general. Where is my Why is that way? I don't know. I'm gonna have to fix that. Right, Attorney General, Treasurer, Auditor and Inspector, Labor Commissioner, Superintendent of Public Instruction, and an Insurance Commissioner, right? These are all executive branch officials. They are all elected directly by the people. So in Oklahoma, you could have a governor of one party and a lieutenant governor of the other party, and we have had just that situation before. And that also means that the governor may not be on the same page as the superintendent of public instruction about what should be done in the public school systems, right? What kind of legislation should be done. And who wins that fight depends on which one has more influence with the legislator, right? Which one can convince the state legislature to follow their plan and their recommendations. And that's not always the governor.
I guess on that note, I think it's interesting, in that same regards, Kevin Stitt's kind of big on like private education, but at the same time, the auditor and inspector have found stuff against epic schools.
Yes, right.
Or like
So
Hunter and Governor Stitt, they battled it out this past year.
the Attorney General has not been on the same page with the governor on several things this last year. The State Superintendent of Public Instruction and the Auditor and Inspector both have been critical of EPIC, whereas the governor has not been as much so. So that's what you get when you have these kind of situations, right? Is people can be pursuing different agendas. This should make you cautious, by the way, when things aren't going great, of always saying, well, it must be the governor's fault, because the governor isn't in control of a bunch of this stuff, right? They literally simply do not have the authority. So remember back when that evil Mary Fallon was, governor, and terrible things were happening and whatnot, right? To lay all of that at her feet is not consistent with the facts, okay? Could she be blamed for some stuff? Absolutely. Nobody's saying they can't be, right? But there are a lot of things that are just out of the governor's control, and being able to distinguish that is kind of important to know who to hold accountable for what actions, okay? The governor's office, just so you know, I think I mentioned this last week, right? The governor's office is in the state capitol building, on the second floor of the state capitol building, whereas the legislature, the two House and Senate chambers, are on the fourth and fifth floors. All right, a couple other officials that are actually technically part of the Oklahoma executive branch is the Corporation Commission. So corporation commissioners do not act independently, right? You have a corporation commission that acts as a body, right? It is charged with regulating public utilities, oil companies and natural gas companies, and transportation companies, so trucking and railroads, that kind of thing, right? But they act as a body, and so there's three of them, right? Can anybody name any of the members of the Corporation Commission? Yeah, I thought so. I'm not surprised. I forget one of their names all the time. But all right, so the person who's been on the corporation the longest is this guy right here, Bob Anthony. He was elected, I believe, his first time to the Corporation Commission in 1988, somewhere around in there. Todd Hyatt is the former Speaker of the House of the Oklahoma House of Representatives, and ran for lieutenant governor and was defeated by Jerry Askins, and the Corporation Commission kind of became his fallback plan, ran for that in the subsequent election and got elected there. And then Dana Murphy is the third member, and she has been in the oil and gas industry for a long time as an attorney, I believe. But again, they can't make individual decisions per se, right? They act as a body, so they vote on things, and whoever gets two or more votes wins. Okay, so that's how that body wins. Let's go back and see if. All right, so everybody knows the governor, right? Can anybody tell me the names of any of these other officials?
I know Lieutenant Governor
Matt Pinnell, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
The Attorney General is Mike Hunter.
Right. So we got two who got that one. I'm impressed.
Joy Hoffmeister, I believe, is the superintendent of Public instruction?
Right, right. So good. All right. So now we got all the easy ones. Anybody tell me? And listen, there's one on here that I can't remember his name either. So you might look, if you got your laptop, you might look this person up here in a minute. All right. So the state treasurer is Randy McDaniel. Okay. The labor commissioner is, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just had a meltdown here. Leslie Osborne. She's a former state representative. Leslie Osborne. The auditor and inspector is Cindy Bird. She was a longtime employee of the auditor and inspector's office and then ran for that seat when the other one was, I believe, term limited out. And then the insurance commissioner is the name I can't ever remember. So somebody look up Oklahoma Insurance Commissioner and see if you can get a name for me.
Glenn Mulready.
Mulready, yeah, Glenn Mulready. All right, so listen, the fact that you guys knew 4 of these is pretty impressive because most people cannot tell me anybody's name on this list, right?
I had the auditor like on my mind just reading my ethic, but I couldn't get her first name.
Yeah. So, so these folks, again, all elected directly by the people. In today's environment, all of these folks are Republicans, all right? That is, historically, that has not been the case in Oklahoma. And we'll talk about that later on in the course. Historically, Oklahoma has been a Democrat-dominated state up until, it wasn't until 2004 that they, I think, 2004, 2006, Republicans gained a majority in the state House. And then I believe it was 2008 before they gained a majority. It may have been 2010, but at least 2008, they gained a majority in the state Senate as well. And it was the 1990s, if I remember right, the first time all of statewide, all of the congressional delegation. So 1994 was the first time that Oklahoma's entire congressional delegation was Republican. And in fact, if you go back 2 years earlier, the majority of the delegation was Democratic.
Oklahoma's kind of got better since Brad Henry left office, right?
Yeah, it's continuing a long trend, right? So Oklahoma has certainly been, in presidential elections, has been a Republican state for a long time. The last time the Democrat candidate for president won most of the votes in Oklahoma, you have to go back to 1964 and Lyndon Johnson's campaign. But even though the state has voted Republican in presidential elections, Democrats have dominated state politics for a long time, right? And the switch has been relatively recent if you look at the history of the state. All right. So to be governor in Oklahoma, you must be at least 31 years old, a qualified voter in the state for at least 10 years. What makes you a qualified voter? Basically, you can't be a felon, right, who's serving their sentence. You have to have a residence in the state, okay, that type of thing. So the governor delivers a message each year, and the Constitution requires this, what we call unoriginally the State of the State address, right? The governor delivers that. In fact, next Monday will be the first, will be when the governor is doing that. I'm trying to see if we can get transportation to go out there, if you guys would like to do that. Plan on making that an all-day event.
I said, knowing government time, they say it's going to be out something that could be 3 hours later.
Yeah, right. But it will be not, we won't just go and hear the governor give a speech, all right? Since you all have projects, we will be going, we'll go to each of you need to find out, this will be helpful, find out who your state senator and state representative are. We will go to their offices. I will introduce you to their legislative assistant. And if they're around, we'll introduce you to them as well. Okay. That will be helpful for your project. Okay. We'll talk to some lobbyists that are out there. We will talk to some media folks that are out there. So get you kind of introduced to some folks that you're going to be interacting with through that project anyway. Okay, kind of grease the wheels, if you will, for the project. Okay. So what I want to try to do is see if we can't get a big van and just we can all ride in the van if you guys want to do that. If you don't want to do that, you can just meet me out there. I had some students last year that's what they did, is they just met me at the state capitol. We will meet in the basement in the little cafeteria dining area. They've got an open dining area where you can, so that's where we will meet when we get there, and then we'll go start moving around. Okay. So I will know by Wednesday if we can have a vehicle and just provide the transportation. If not, anybody's certainly welcome to ride with me out there, or you can meet me out there on your own. Okay. But let me know by Wednesday. I'll let you know if we have the transportation. You let me know if you want to take advantage of that or if you just want to meet me out there. Okay. Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Back to the governor. Okay. And that goes for you guys that are on Zoom too, right? So this isn't just for the folks in the class today. So if you want to ride with us out there, let me know Wednesday during class if you want to do that. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Good. All right. So the governor gives that state of the state address. The governor is required to prepare and give a budget proposal to the legislature. They are not obligated to do anything with that budget proposal, right? They can like throw it in the trash can as soon as they get it and do their own thing. But the governor is required to submit one to them. The governor can call special sessions. And both Mary Fallin and Governor Stitt have called special sessions. Usually when they do, they're related to budget problems. And that's what we've seen in some of these, is that the revenues that were projected do not match the revenues that actually came in. And usually they're going in the wrong direction, meaning there's less that came in than was projected, and now they have to adjust the budget. So, but they can call special sessions. Again, they can call a special session, but they cannot make the legislature do anything in that special session. And Mary Fallin kind of found this out. She called a special session and wanted them to do a couple of things. And they're like, we're just going to keep this special session open until the regular session, and then we'll deal with it. So that's, again, the governor's authority is very limited in most instances. The governor does appoint about 2,500 positions, probably a little bit less now because they've done some consolidation, but these are not major positions, what we would consider major positions in the executive branch, but they are important. They're heads of agencies and other boards and commissions that the governor can appoint people to. Yeah.
I was gonna ask, when you talk about them being like limited, so like when you hear a lot of criticism for like the governor like Kemp and coronavirus, I mean, how responsible is he versus his legislators and his committees for what's going on in a state like that?
So in the case of the coronavirus, I know Oklahoma has specific legislation granting the governor emergency powers. Okay. Which, depending on what you think about executive power, may or may not be a good idea, right? But they have granted the governor emergency powers. So much of that can be because the legislature has been out of session, right? The governor has not called them into session to address anything related to this, and has been operating primarily like his rule he was going to close down bars and restaurants after 11 o'clock. You guys know about that, right? And then the court said, you can't do that, right? And basically they said, you haven't presented any factual information to demonstrate that before 11 o'clock, hey, things are good. And after 11 o'clock, things are really bad, right? And if you look at the governor's lawyers in the court trying to explain this, they did not look that good. So, but that got struck down, right? So And this is something that we have to remember. Even if the governor does something you like to do, you think they should do, they may not have the last say in it. In this case, the courts have the last say in this, and they said, "No, you may want to do this. You may think it's a good idea, but you haven't proven that it's a legitimate thing to do." Right? So yeah, there are limitations. Even in the exercise of his emergency powers, there are limitations on what he can do. The governor can veto legislation out of the legislature, just like at the national level. A 2/3 vote of both chambers can override the veto. Governor has a 4-year term limit, 4-year term and 2 terms maximum. Right? So 8 years total is what they can serve. And they earn a salary of about $147,000 a year. I don't know if that's been adjusted anytime recently. They're also provided a house and transportation, right? The governor has a plane to travel around the state in, as well as ground transportation.
Does his wife have access to any of this, or how does she end up driving a state vehicle?
Okay, so I should have anticipated that question. I have no idea how the first lady of the state would be driving a state vehicle on her own. Normally, my understanding is if she's traveling for, I can't say official government responsibilities, but government responsibilities relating to be the first lady, she's going to give a speech or she's touring a facility or something like that. Normally, my understanding is that the state troopers would provide that transportation just like they do for the governor. I don't know that that's the case, though. I don't know that 100%. That's something that we should all explore and find out. But if she wasn't going for some official role or capacity, I wouldn't think the state would provide her any transportation. They would say, drive your own car. So I don't know. I don't know how that. You guys know what we're talking about? She was driving a SUV, a government-provided SUV, and wrecked it. Ran into someone.
She ran into somebody?
Yes, that's my understanding. Is that
When was this?
this was about 2 weeks ago, I think.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah, yeah.
What?
I must have missed that.
You guys need to follow the Lost Ogle.
Did that person that she hit file a lawsuit against the state?
Possibly, since she was struck by a state vehicle. Yeah, since I don't know if it was a he or a she that she hit, but so yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of questions about that.
What's
and
the going on with the police? Did she not break a law for hitting that person?
I don't know. It could have been she ran a lie. I don't know. Listen, and I don't want to do too much speculation. I just know she was in an accident. From what I understand, she hit the other vehicle. She was driving a state vehicle, which I don't know why she was driving a state vehicle. And I haven't heard anything since further than that. So kind of an interesting story, but
Singular request to interview her, but she probably declined. Especially for that.
yeah, right. A little bit more, did you guys hear about, this was at the last year or two of Fallon's term, where her daughter moves a mobile home, basically a mobile home onto the governor's mansion grounds and parks it there and is kind of living out of the mobile home.
What?
I had heard that.
Oh, you guys need to catch up.
Stacy brought that up the other day.
Wasn't she using like the water and power and people were like complaining there was like a taxpayers were paying for this?
Exactly, right? So yeah. So a blog, if you want to follow gossipy news like this in Oklahoma, and from a liberal perspective, you need to become familiar with the Lost Ogle. It's a blog, and that's all they do. It really is kind of a government gossipy, and the person who runs it is very liberal. No, it's not. This is a person. They took the Lost Ogle to make fun of the Ogles.
Oh, like the design that was like took this and made fun of them.
Yeah, so you've got Kelly Ogle, you've got Ken Ogle, and the other Ogle on channel, and now Abigail Ogle, who I have to assume is part of that family too, on channel 5. Yeah, I think they're making a play on the Ogle media family in Oklahoma. But like I said, very, very, very liberal. I can only tolerate it in small doses. But sometimes they are the first. That blog is the first to report on some things, right? He has sources all over the place, and there are some times when the other media sources are slow or just ignore a story that they will cover. So that's one. There you go. All right. Let's look at the state legislature here for a second. So you have the state Senate and the state House. Again, Oklahoma is not entirely original in how we name our two chambers of the legislature. There are 48 members of the state Senate. They all serve 4-year terms. However, those 4-year terms are not concurrent. In other words, half the Senate is on one schedule, half the Senate is on the other. So just like at the national level, right? At the national level, not every senator is up for election on the same time. Same thing in the Oklahoma State Senate. Half of them are up every 2 years. Okay.
There's Langford coming up, right?
What's that?
We have Langford since Inhofe just was up, right? So do Langford next in
I'm trying to remember if Langford's last election was 2 or 4 years ago. If it was 2,
Langford's up for re-election in 2022.
Who is? Langford is?
Yes.
Okay, then yeah. But remember, and this is the thing that students always get tripped up, especially, again, beginning American government students. Remember the difference between U.S. officials and state officials, right? Langford is a U.S. senator. He is not a member of the Oklahoma State Senate, right? And so when I'm telling you to visit, when you're looking for legislation, you want to look for legislation that's happening in the state Senate or state House, and you need to be talking to those people. I have to be 25 years old to be a member of the Senate. So if you're 25 or older, congratulations, you can run for state Senate if you so choose to. They are limited to 3 terms. I'll come back and talk about that in a minute. And they have a salary of $47,500 a year annually. Okay. The House, you've got 101 members of the House. They serve 2-year terms, just like the U.S. House. They all are up for election every 2 years. You got to be 21 years old. They have 6-year terms, and then they make the same as the senators at $47,500. The legislature is in session from the first Monday in February until the last business day of May. Okay, so that is the time when we say in session, what we mean is that is the time when they can make laws. Okay, that is the regular annual session of the state legislature.
What is it again?
The first business day in May or in February to the last business day in May. They can't, if they get their work done early, like last year, they adjourned earlier than the end of May because they said we're done. We got our work done. A lot of that deals with how long it takes them to get a budget written. The longer it takes for that to happen, the later they're going to be in the session. Okay, term limits. So Oklahoma was in fact the first state in the country to enact term limits on its state legislators. And this came by a vote of the people, an amendment to the state constitution in 1990, I believe is when the vote occurred. It's a very strict term limits law. First of all, it's a 12-year limit. So no one can serve in the legislature longer than 12 years. And it is 12 years total service. So in other words, I can't serve 12 years in the Senate and then get elected to the House and serve 12 years. It's 12 years. So if I run for the House and I serve the House 4 years and then I want to run for the Senate seat, I've got a maximum of 8 years that I can serve in the Senate after that. And it is a lifetime ban. So once I have served in that position, I can never come back and run for the state legislature again in Oklahoma.
Is there a reason why they implemented that?
I've always wanted to.
There, let me give you a name. If you want to do some research, you can on anything. Gene Stipe was a state senator from, I think, Muskogee. Had been in the state legislature for 40, almost 50 years, maybe over 50 years. was known to be the person who controlled things, even though he was not always in an official leadership position, and eventually got convicted of all sorts of corruption charges and campaign violations, finance violations and such. And he was kind of the poster boy for the term limits movement in Oklahoma. And in Oklahoma, I don't know that this, in every state that you have term limits, I don't know that you can say this is across the board, but in Oklahoma, Republicans saw term limits as an opportunity to gain greater foothold in the legislature, right? Because at the time, the Democrats dominated the state legislature. And I mean, as much as Republicans dominated it today, Democrats dominated it back then. And they saw term limits as a way to force some of those long-term Democrats out and have a shot to pick up seats.
So like, with a lot of like national politics people, they go and they're tied to like private lobbyist companies. So do we see a lot more of people from Oklahoma like going to like a lobbyist type of deal, or do they just switch around like a corporation, like whatever that corporation no one knew about earlier?
Uh-huh.
Can't run in here. Do we see like more like lobbyist activity, or just switching off?
So it can vary. So most legislators, when they come into the office, have a full-time job of somewhat. Now, whether or not they can continue that depends on some things, right? You can't be a state employee and a state legislature simultaneously, right? So if I wanted to run for the state legislature, I could not continue to teach at Rose State College because it's a state public institution. Same thing would be for teachers of public schools. I think members of like the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, anybody who works in state government in some way could not keep that job and be a member of the legislature. But if I work for a private corporation, if I'm an insurance salesman, if I am, if I'm a small business owner, in most of the cases, I can do that and continue and be a state legislature, right? So a lot of them do that. A lot of them come up here, they serve their however long they serve, and they go back and they focus on their whatever job they were doing before. Many of them look for other opportunities. Those opportunities can be lobbyist positions. And there was somewhat of a controversy a couple of years ago. The State Ethics Commission wanted to establish a rule that would require a 2-year wait, I think, from the time you leave the legislature till you can become a lobbyist. And there were several legislators who had already lined up lobbying gigs, and they didn't want that to happen. And so they kind of squashed that. But so in Oklahoma, there isn't that waiting period. I can come out of the legislature and I can go right into a lobbying period. At the federal level, there is a 2-year, they call it a cooling off period, but a 2-year wait in which I could not engage in lobbying activities. That does not mean I couldn't be employed by a lobbying firm. I just could not engage in lobbying activities for that 2-year period. In Oklahoma, there's no such restriction. I can go straight into it if I want. So that is, and then obviously running for higher office, right? And I think for a lot of legislators, that's, they start in the legislature and they're like, okay, but what I really want to do is be governor, or what I really want to do is run for Congress or whatever. And so they try to use their role and their position within the legislature as a building, a stepping stool for that next office, okay? Which you can be seen by how many of these statewide offices are employed by former state legislators, right, of some form or fashion. Okay, let's see, the salary. So the legislature, unlike Congress, the Oklahoma legislature does not have the ability to set its own pay, right? There is an actual board, it's the Oklahoma Legislative Compensation Commission, I believe is what it's called. And they determine the salary for legislators. 3 years ago, they actually reduced the legislator pay. So the legislator pay at that time was roughly $38,000. There was all sorts. This was towards the end of the Fallon administration. There were all sorts of budget problems. Nobody was happy with what was going on in state government. And this was kind of like a punitive measure of saying, if you guys can't get your act right, we are just not going to pay you as much, right? And so they cut it by, $3,000. They dropped it to $35,000. Then last year, I think it was, they came back and they voted again to raise it to that 47.5 number.
That's fair amount of raise.
That's not bad. Yeah. And
Who appoints the people in the commission?
oh, that's a good question. I believe it's like some of the others, that the governor, the speaker pro tempore, and or the speaker of the House and the Senate president pro tempore all appoint people to that commission. Okay. So you could say, right, that while they may not have controlled that, they have some influence. That's certainly fair to say. But at the end of the day, I don't think anybody in the legislature was voting for a pay cut, 3 years ago. So once they're on there, they can act independently of the people who appoint them. And most of these boards and commissions, they have a period of time in which they are, they serve. So like it's a 4-year term or a 6-year term or whatever. So during that time, they really can act independently of the legislature. And as long as they're not breaking any laws or anything, you're stuck with who you appoint. Okay, Oklahoma's judiciary is uniquely structured as well, okay? We have a 3-tiered system. So you've got the state Supreme Court, you have 2 intermediate courts, or what we call appellate courts, and then you have the district courts, which are they handle the workload of cases. They handle most of the cases. I'll start, I guess, at the top with the Oklahoma Supreme Court, which is the final authority for all civil and constitutional cases. All right. So if there's, that we've had last year, I forget what the case was, but it had to do with a constitutional provision, and it went to the state Supreme Court. There was also a question about, Oklahoma has an identification requirement for voting. And if you vote by mail, the way the state law was written required you to get a notarized, get your ballot notarized before you send it in. The state Supreme Court struck that requirement down. Interestingly enough, and I'm not sure how this works, the state legislature came back, because that happened while the state legislature was in session, and they passed a law saying you have to have it notarized, or you have to have you submit a copy of a valid driver's license with it. So I'm not sure. Somebody will have to sue before that'll get clarified again. Yes.
I hear that one of them was retiring, maybe like a Tom Coburn or something like that.
One of the state Supreme Court members?
Yeah.
I'm sure there are. In fact, at one period, was it last year or the year before last, a majority of the members on the court were not actually members of the court. So unlike the Supreme Court, like the Supreme Court, someone dies or retires, the state Supreme Court can temporarily put someone in there so it can function as a full body, okay? And so at one period, they had a couple of people who retired, a couple of people who took other positions or whatnot. They were like half the court was not really permanent members of the court. But that's a difference between the Oklahoma Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court that wouldn't do it that way, right? They are nominated by a judicial nominating committee. So here's how this works, okay? We have a vacancy on the court. This judicial nominating commission will take applications from interested parties who would like to be on the court. They will review them, okay? They will recommend 3 names to the governor, okay? So they'll say, here are the 3 most qualified or whatever. And then the governor will choose one of those 3 to be the appointee. So unlike at the national level, the nominee isn't solely chosen by the president, right? The governor gets to choose from a list of names that's given to them and said, here's your range of choices, okay? Again, that does not mean that the governor might not have some influence in that process, but it means, unlike the president, the governor's power to ensure someone on there is much more limited than what we might think. After they've been appointed to the court, they will show up on what is called a retention ballot every 6 years. So if you went and voted this year, you might have seen some of these. I saw some of these, right? Should this person be retained upon the Oklahoma Supreme Court for another term of office? All right. If the majority of people vote yes, they're safe. They get to stay there again. If the majority of people vote no, they're going to be leaving the court. The Judicial Nominating Committee is going to be kicked into gear, and they'll appoint someone the governor will approve. Okay. There is some, now, first of all, voting on judicial races, there's a huge drop off from voting for like governor or U.S. senator or president to when they get down to these ballots. A lot of people don't even vote in these because most people have no idea, right? I can name one person on the state Supreme Court, and the only reason I can name her is because I worked with her before she was on the Supreme Court and before I was at Rose, right? Outside of that, I couldn't tell you who's on there.
Is that the one you interviewed for intro to?
Yes, that's her. Noma Gurich, yeah, who served a term. And so they rotate, unlike at the U.S. level, where the person who's the Chief Justice is the Chief Justice until they leave the court. In Oklahoma, they rotate who the Chief Justice is for over a period of time. And I don't know, I can't tell you if they vote on that or how that's done, but I know there's a kind of a rotation amongst them. Okay, so that's the state Supreme Court. We also have two intermediate courts, the Court of Civil Appeals, okay, and the Court of Criminal Appeals. Let's start with the Court of Civil Appeals. Again, this is really different from how things work at the national level. A case that gets started at the lowest level in the district courts, let's say it gets appealed. That appeal goes to the state Supreme Court first, okay? The state Supreme Court decides, does the appeal have merit? Then it decides, are we going to hear it directly, or are we going to send it down to the Civil Court of Appeals? Okay. If it goes to the Civil Court of Appeals, it'll be assigned there. There are 12 members of the Civil Court of Appeals, but they don't all sit as one body. Okay. They're divided into 4 groups of judges. Right. And each group of 3 judges hear cases as they get assigned to them. Okay. Those cases can be appealed back to the Supreme Court as well. All right. So very odd animal. At the national level, right, you go from the district courts, federal district courts, to the appellate courts, to the Supreme Court. There isn't any of this back and forth, right? But in Oklahoma, for civil and constitutional matters, it can go to the Supreme Court and then they can assign it to that Civil Court of Appeals, or they can hear it themselves. Okay. Criminal cases are not heard by the state Supreme Court at all. The final authority for criminal cases in Oklahoma is the Court of Criminal Appeals. There are 5 members of it. They hear all of these cases as one body. And if you don't like the ruling you get from that body, your only option is to try to get it into federal courts after that.
Which is
pretty challenging. Yeah.
The Supreme Court only in the other courts, like what are they called, like the district?
Uh-huh.
Is that what they're called?
Yes, both at the national and state level. That lowest level of court is called a district court.
Yeah, that's what, like, they don't receive much, right?
Well, you have to convince, if you're in a state court and if you don't like the answer the state has given you and you want to go on, you've got to get it into the federal courts, but you've got to convince the federal courts that you have now a federal issue, right? Something relating usually to the U.S. Constitution or at least a U.S. law that would be at play, right? If you can't do that, they're not going to hear the case,
So
right?
Does your case like directly go somewhere, or let's say you had something that like could be politically determined by what the body of the court is. So if you had like a case that went to like, what is it, District 9 or whatever in California versus
Okay.
in Texas, do they assign it directly to your locality, or could you have your results determined by the political affiliations of the judges?
So at the US level, the appellate courts are geographical bodies, right? Oklahoma, Kansas, Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah, I think all make up the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, right? And so if the 10th Circuit issues a ruling different from the 9th Circuit out in California, then there's a conflict there. Those rulings then become only binding on the states that are within that geographical location. That's going to be a case the Supreme Court's going to hear, because the Supreme Court's not going to tolerate the law being different in different states, right? In Oklahoma, since the appellate courts operate a little bit differently, right? The Civil Court of Appeals only gets its cases from the Supreme Court, right? A lot of times the Supreme Court will be like, this needs a really thorough review. We're going to let the Court of Civil Appeals hear it, and then we'll see what they come up with and whether or not we want to hear it after that, right? Sometimes it might be a matter that there's a time issue, right? That a ruling needs to be made more quickly, a pressing matter, like during election season when we had the issue relating to votes and whatnot. Well, you can't let that drag on past the election day. You've got a problem, right? So they're going to hear that case. They're probably going to hear that case themselves directly. But you don't have, I would say, as big a divide amongst at the appellate level that you might have at the appellate level within the national system, because you really only have one appeals court, right? You only have one appellate level court, or that intermediate court. So yeah, so if I'm a criminal and I've been convicted of a crime, don't like my outcome, and I appeal it, and I don't like what the Criminal Court of Appeals says, my only alternative is to then get my case into a federal court, right? Which can be challenging. All right, district courts. So now, let me back up for just a second. The members of these two courts are appointed through that nominating commission as well. Okay, so they go through that same process that we mentioned about the Supreme Court. Okay, now at the lowest level, the district courts, these courts will hear any case. So a judge can be a district judge and hear a criminal case and a civil case, any of those kinds of cases. All right. There are 26 judicial districts in the state of Oklahoma. So again, they're kind of geographically determined. These judges, however, are elected to their positions. Okay, so they serve 4-year terms. There are no term limits on state judges. So they can serve as long as they can convince people to continue voting for them, which isn't that hard as long as they stay out of trouble, right? As long as they are, investigated for something or accused of a crime or something. And we had one judge last year who went through that process, and I think eventually was removed from the courts, right? They have a whole investigation process, and they have their own kind of separate judicial process for determining whether or not someone is allowed to stay on the court, right? That is different than a criminal proceeding, right? Just because someone gets removed from their position as a judge doesn't automatically mean they're going to go to jail. Okay, a separate criminal trial would have to be initiated in that case. So, but these folks are elected. They're the only judges in the state that are elected this way directly. And again, voting for district judges there's a much lower vote count, right, than if you're looking at voting for governor or even state legislature or that type of thing, right? Again, and it's just a matter of nobody knows who these people are. And unless you're an attorney who's had a case before, a judge, or somebody who works closely with the courts or whatnot, the likelihood is, you might not know if they're a good judge or a bad judge or a mediocre judge, because there's not a lot. And that might actually turn out to be for the good, right? I mean, when you think about judges, there is a really good argument that electing judges probably isn't a great idea, right? Because you subject them to a process that they have to cater to somebody to get elected. And then they're going to tailor their rulings to satisfy that constituency that got them elected in the first place, right? Rather than focusing more on what the law says or that type of thing. And so we've seen that in Oklahoma, right? You have judges who've been very harsh about sentencing people for being convicted of crimes and stuff, because traditionally in Oklahoma, being tough on crime has been what got you elected, whether you were a state prosecutor or a state judge or that kind of thing. And so being accused of being soft on crime could hurt you in your reelection chances. So they don't run in partisan elections. So they don't run as Republicans or Democrats or anything like that, which is probably another reason why turnout is low. There has been some research demonstrating that nonpartisan elections, you see lower turnout, lower votes than in partisan elections, which isn't surprising because that's what parties are about, is organizing for elections, right? Getting people to show up and vote. All right, any questions about the judiciary?
We're just gonna ask about this. So, like when you say that generally they're not partisan, so there's probably a good reality that when I guess what was her name, Kendra Coleman was convicted and removed, that there was definitely some questionable material that removed her. It wasn't necessarily partisan, like
Right.
David Prater was.
Right. And that's an interesting comment that you, thing that you noticed too, right? So for district attorneys, right? You guys know what district attorneys are, right? They are the lead prosecutors, and basically you have a district attorney assigned to each judicial district, okay? But they do run in partisan races, right? So you run as a Republican or a Democrat for the office of district attorney. And so the question becomes, well, is it more important to have turnout in the vote, right? Or is it more important to have a judicial official who is not going to be concerned about catering to a particular constituency to win office, right? Which is the more important thing here. And I think that with judges, that can really get problematic. I think we have seen over time, it's even problematic with district attorneys in the way they conduct their offices as well. All right, in Oklahoma, we've got a lot of ways in which we, the people, can impact and make the laws, right? So now we do not at the state level have a recall process in Oklahoma. So a recall is basically you got an elected official, let's say the governor. Let's say a lot of people are not happy with the way the governor has conducted themselves, and they're about halfway through their term. You could, in a recall environment, you could circulate a petition. If you get the required number of signatures, you can force that governor to run for re-election prior to the end of their term, right? Probably the most famous recall election is the one in California where the governor became governor, right? Where Schwarzenegger won that. I think it was Gray Davis at the time was the governor there. They were having horrible problems, energy problems. And it seems like California is always having energy problems, but they were having a really bad time. Recall was announced. There were like 50 some candidates, I think, that ended up. This was before Jimmy Fallon became the night show host. It was Jay, what's his name?
Leno?
Yes, Jay Leno. How can I forget? Right? He's my generation, right? Anyway, Jay Leno was on the Tonight Show, and he had all of the candidates for governor for California in that recall election in the audience, or at least a large section of them. And it took up a large section of his studio audience, right? But that's what a recall does, all right? Now, it's not a guarantee, and I'll give you an example. In Wisconsin in 2010, Scott Walker is elected governor, makes a lot of enemies with the teachers' unions up there and some other unions and different interests. They circulate a recall petition and make him run for re-election in 2012, and he actually wins by a larger margin than he won in 2010. So The recall isn't a guarantee that you're going to get rid of that official. It's just an opportunity to.
They probably usually, like the person in recall probably uses their attorney to like go against it, right? Because I live in Norman and there's a lady trying to recall and she's saying that the signatures aren't valid on the recall.
Right,
That's
because
pretty common.
there has to be a somebody is going to be checking to make sure those signatures are valid, because the signatures also always have to be from registered voters in that state, right? And then there's going to be some authority that verifies that. In Oklahoma, and I think in most states, it's the Office of the Secretary of State that would certify the signatures and verify them. We do have the initiative petition, right? So this would allow, let's say you want a law that says, you know what, professors shouldn't be able to assign homework over the weekends, right? And you can't get a legislator to file that bill for you for some reason. And so you decide, I'm going to start a petition. And there is a process, right? So you have to formally announce that you want to start this position and fill out some paperwork with the state. Again, I think with the Secretary of State's office. Then you have a number of days. Usually it's 90 days in which to collect the number of signatures required. In Oklahoma, for an initiative petition, if it's dealing with just a statutory law, you need 8% of the registered voters in the last general election. So that would be 8% of the voters who turned out in the presidential election in 2020. Okay. If you're trying to get a constitutional change, you need 15% of those registered voters to sign your petition. And again, those signatures are going to be turned into the Office of the Secretary of State. They got a staff of people who are going to verify that, yes, indeed, these people are actually registered voters. If you meet that requirement, boom, it's going to be put on a ballot somewhere, right? And this is where some things can get controversial and can get bogged down. There are specific requirements, and I'm not going to go into detail, but there is a specific formula for writing ballot questions, okay? And oftentimes there are disputes over whether or not the language in the question adequately explains what the question is about, right? And we've had situations in which the way a question was written, voting yes meant you were against the proposal and voting no meant you were for it, right? And so usually those will get hashed out in the courts, and you know they will determine the language if there's some argument over it. The marijuana issue got caught up in some of that, right? So, and I'm not sure if it's the Attorney General's office that is the one always assigned to writing the questions, but I know in the marijuana situation, it was the Attorney General's office that was assigned the responsibility of drafting the language for the question. There were proponents of that issue that felt like the way it was drafted was detrimental. You know, it was intentionally written to get people to vote against it. And it did get up to the courts, and the courts did require them to change it, but this dragged it out. And so from the time it had been, they had turned the signatures in until the time it actually got on a ballot was longer than normal, because they were going through these court disputes over the language on there. And the Attorney General's office at the time, this was before Mike Hunter, but the Attorney General's office at the time was really dragging their feet on it too. So
Were they not fans of marijuana?
they were not fans of
Drew Edmondson would be kind of.
yeah, this was Scott Pruitt. Yeah.
Scott Pruitt?
Yeah.
Wow.
No,
He was the
that's the
young
one that
guy.
had the little bow tie thing, right? With some type of.
I think sometimes he wore a bow tie. Yeah. He eventually got appointed in the Trump administration, and then kind of got ran out of the Trump administration for some stuff. So yeah.
Something about a point, I think.
Something about wanting to live like certain people in Washington, D.C., but not making enough money to live like people in Washington, D.C. Something along those lines. But anyway, so the initiative petition is there. If you get the proper signatures, you can get an issue on the ballot, right? You also have the referendum. So the referendum is where the legislature will put something on the ballot for a vote of the people. And a lot of times this is with really controversial items that a lot of legislators just don't want to have to make a choice. They'll say, we'll let the people decide, right? And so they'll put that on there, and then the people can pass that measure themselves, right? You guys probably don't even know what I mean when I say liquor by the drink. So let me explain this. Oklahoma was a dry state for a long time, even after Prohibition. All right. In Oklahoma, up until the 1980s, if you went to a restaurant, you could not buy a single glass of wine or a single glass of beer. You had to buy a bottle, right? Uh, and and there were a bunch of people who were like, "This makes no sense. You're probably contributing more to alcoholism and drunk driving than you are, stopping it. So we need to change this." That was done by referendum, right? The legislature really did not want to touch that issue, and we're happy to let the people decide. If I remember right, horse track betting was also done through referendum, and the lottery was done through a referendum. So those three measures were done by the legislature saying, we're going to let you folks decide what you want to do with this. Okay. And then you have what's called a referendum petition. All right. So let's say the legislature passes something and there's a bunch of people who are like, that's stupid. We don't want that. Okay. You can propose changes to that legislation during the current active legislative session. Okay. Has to be filed with the Secretary of State's office, right? Not past 90 days after the adjournment of the legislative session, right? So it ends in May. So you got 90 days from the end of May to file your petition, right, or your documentation with the state to do this. And you need 5% of registered voters to sign your petition, right? And then you can undo something done by the legislature. And sometimes you've heard, sometimes I've heard this categorized as like a legislative veto or something like this, but basically you're using a process to overturn something done by the legislature by the vote of the people within a time frame that's pretty short. All right. I can't remember the last time this measure had been used, all right, but it is available. The only thing about the Oklahoma Constitution is it didn't trust anybody, all right? They didn't want the governor having all this power, so they divided up the executive. They didn't want the legislature having too much power, so they took a lot of things out of its hands, right? There are a lot of things related to state governor that the government, that the legislature itself, especially the budget, can't touch because of the way our Constitution's written. And then it gave the people all sorts of mechanisms to go around the legislature to get something done if they couldn't convince the legislature to do it, right? So a lot of people talk about the folks in the time period of the formation of the state constitution being very populist and being very progressive. But in that time, what that meant is they didn't trust anybody. They didn't trust corporations. They didn't trust government. They didn't trust, the more that they could restrict the amount of decisions any given person within any kind of power had, the happier they were, right? Which is why we kind of have this kind of disjointed system. All right. Oh, okay. So these were all passed. Let's see. State Question 794, which I believe had to deal with criminal justice reform. I mentioned there was another new alcohol thing that was just passed, I think in 2018, where, this was the one, remember, at one point in time, you couldn't buy High Point beer in convenience stores and grocery stores. 792 was the one that changed that. The marijuana issue was an initiative petition, and I don't remember what state question. I'm gonna have to look back up state question 747. So we use a variety of these in different ways, and they can be successful and they can fail. I mean, there's no guarantee one way or the other. But that's the thing that I want to leave you when thinking about Oklahoma government. Really is. All the decision makers are really constrained. When we talk about at the national level, I talk about the national level in American government and whatnot about, things being disjointed and lots of moving parts. In the state government of Oklahoma, there's even more moving parts because the writers of this Constitution did not want anybody to be able to make too many dangerous decisions that that they felt were not in the people's interest or that the people didn't want made for them, right? And so we have all these different mechanisms to get around that and to get around the legislature and people in power to get what we want, right? Whether that's a good thing or not, you have to decide, but that's the way it is. Anybody got any questions before we wrap up here?
You said that you're going to get a set up, I guess, this week, right, with some app or something that lets you follow current bills, right? Or bills are going fast, so it's easier to.
Okay, so here, yeah, let's see if I can do this real quick.
I just saw that shortly after I went into the captain with our plan things due, so I was like, I gotta figure out what my bill's gonna be.
Yeah, let's see. Let's go to, let's see, I'll just do, and I'll pull this up, and then I need to share my screen with our Zoom folks so they can see this too. And I'm going to show you there's a mechanism. Now I'm going to have to remember. Okay, you see down here in this corner, track bills or create account. Can you? It's not on the right one. Okay, hold on, guys. Hold on. Can you guys on Zoom still see this state legislative web page that I'm on?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. All right. So if you look down here, it says track bills and then log in or create account. Okay. We'll see if I can remember what my login information is. But let's just try. All right, we're in. So if you haven't created an account, you just create an account, you give it some basic information. And then this will allow you, okay, what kind of actions do you want to track? Well, really, you want to track everything related to your bill, okay? And then there is a way on here. Let me see if I can remember. So you can track either a House bill, a Senate bill. Those are the two you're really probably going to be looking at. Concurrent resolutions or joint resolutions. Those usually aren't serious bills. Those are declaring it Taco Day in Oklahoma or something like that, right?
Every Tuesday.
Right, something along those lines. But there is a way to, let's see if it's that. Okay. So you can track a specific bill, right, this way, or you can come over here to subject. I think that's this. Yeah, so now you can start looking at subject areas of bills. Now, what you want to find, though, are bills being offered in this session, right? So let's just, let's pick one. Let's see if we've got. That's not what I want. Agriculture. Let's just pick one. Here we go. All right. So these are all the bills that they have as relating to that topic, all right? Something about business employers, okay? So you can kind of get a short little explanation of the bill number, okay? It's been introduced. It was introduced in the House, right? Or introduced in the Senate. And that at this point, that's what you're looking at is bills that are introduced because they have a deadline in late December that they have to file the bills that they're going to offer for the next session, okay? Then all that has to get put into the system. And then come February, you'll start seeing action on these bills. And so the last action then will become something along the lines of assigned to committee or committee hearing or something like that, right? But so you can, if you're looking for just a topic to cover, then you can go to that topics area. If you've got a specific bill already in mind, then you can track it specifically by just typing it in that bill where the bill number thing. Let me see if I can go back to there. And let's go back one more. Okay, here, right? So I can do, let's see if I can remember one of those numbers. It's bill 1671. Okay. All right. So yeah, it tells me a little bit about it, right? It tells me who authored it, important information to know, okay? It will have its first reading on February 1st, okay? And there you go. So it's a pretty decent website. You just got to get around and feel your way through it some, but you can track it. You can track it by author. So if you have a senator or representative and you're interested in what they've authored, you can, go and track that. So if you're in the House, right, I can look up, let's look up, because I know her. All right. And here she's the principal, right? You can also look up co-authors, right? But principal author, okay. And let's see. All right. So these are all the bills that she's authored for this session. Okay. So you can do it that way too. Everybody following along? But it's a good way of getting in, keeping track of legislation that you're going to be following. Any other questions related to that? I will know by Wednesday if we can have transportation to the state capitol. You guys need to be able to tell me if you need transportation to the state capitol. If you're going to go out with me, you need to plan to be there pretty much all day. Okay. If you're going to go out there on your own, you can leave whenever you can. But I will tell you, parking is going to be crazy. All right. I also, we probably won't be able to be in the legislative chamber when the governor is giving the speech. My understanding is they're going to have some overflow areas, try to keep people social distance and that kind of thing, that we can sit in and watch it. So we will watch it, but we're going to spend the day meeting with different folks as well, right? Putting you guys in touch with people. All right, everybody good?
I was going to ask, so on your plan, like what types of individuals, that's just like who you want to interview. It's not like who you got.
Yeah, I don't need a specific name. I want, I would want to interview the person of a interest group related to this topic, or I want to interview a police officer who would be responsible for enforcing this, something like that. Yeah.
When you looking up your state and representative and senator, do you just Google your address or something?
The easiest way to do that, if you go to that state legislative homepage, again, okhouse.gov or oksenate.gov, okay, it will have an option, yeah, right here, find your senator.
That's awesome.
And basically what you'll do is you'll type in your address and it'll tell you who your state senator is. And you do that for the House has a similar one for the House side.
Last question I have, several does the first lady have like any email or anything? I'm just thinking if I get the nerve, I really want to know like I really want to question her on her.
I assume so. Before you do that, I would look and see if what you can find out in the media relating to it, right?
It was just if I really want to know about it. It wouldn't be like something I'm just
Yeah. Well, what I'm thinking is you would, if you look at, especially, I hate to say this, because they're one of the first ones that reported on this was the Lost Ogle, right? This is one of those stories that they were out of the gate with. So you have that. Non-doc might have something on it too. And while we're out at the state capitol, we talked to a couple of media folks, you might talk to them and see what kind of information. The reason that's good is it gives you an idea of what kind of questions to formulate, right? What information has already been gained, what hasn't, right? And then it can help you in the kind of questions you would want to ask.
I think if you brought that up
Yeah, I wouldn't, that would not be what I would lead with. Yeah.
I don't wanna, I wanna be on the good side of, Rob's standards. I don't know if I really wanna start that off with him, because I suspect he's probably.
I don't know. Well, listen, I don't know. Remember, the governor has not had a great relationship with the legislature, even of his members of his own party. But if and I'm not telling you to do it this way, but if I were going to bring it up, I would bring it up like, I heard this first lady was in an auto accident. Is she okay? Did she get hurt? Do you know what happened? I don't even know if this is true or not.
Should I start a GoFundMe page?
Yeah, right. Something like that. Express some concern, some sympathy, and then see where the conversation would lead. That would be my
It's not a
suggestion.
short one, it's just a thought. If I get so inclined, I really do want to know what her thinking was there.
Right. Okay. You guys on Zoom, you okay? Are we ready to go?
Think so.
All right. I will see you guys Wednesday. Everybody have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrew, you want to hang around a minute?
Yes.